Chapter 7. The dude that sent me to the penitentiary for life, someone who's sitting over there doing 6 months while I'm sitting here doing life, and I got a chance to get that dude? You bet I'm gonna break my back to get him. The guy all burned to pieces with the cutting torch. Well, he deserved that 100 times over. Whoever did that ought to get a medal pinned to his chest. A baby raper and a child molester. That's a sick individual, and he's got anything coming that anybody does to him. Inmate, Penitentiary of New Mexico. 5 a.m., Saturday, February 2nd, 1980. The fire in the Psychological Services Unit was roaring. Rioters had turned the blowtorch to the unit to put the finishing touch on its destruction. Just above it, in the old men's dormitory where I was, the smoke was getting so thick we began to think we wouldn't get out alive. Flames were licking up in the stairwell, the only exit, and the intense heat from the fire below made it impossible to stand on the floor. Finally, someone remembered that the band practice room was just behind the dormitory. Using the metal beds as battering rams, we managed to knock through a wall into the room and save our lives. There were windows there which were all smashed open, each of us stationing ourselves by a broken pane and breathing in fresh air. The band room overlooked the front of the penitentiary. We could see that the police had already arrived, and over a 2-mile radio, a rider had given us, we'd been hearing that Deputy Warden Montoya was also there. We tried to contact him, but it took a while. The smoke is real bad up here, we told him when we finally got him on the phone. It's beginning to get to a lot of men. The fire is so hot downstairs, it looks like the floor might collapse. And if it does, there's 50 to 60 men here that will burn to death. There's nothing we can do to help you, Montoya answered. None of the administration is coming into the penitentiary. The only thing you can do is find some way out on your own. But we can't get out. The only way out is blocked by flames and smoke, so one can't get through. Someone who thought they could get to the point across better grabbed the radio. Man, we're burning up. You gotta do something or everyone up here is gonna be cremated. Can't you bring us some chains at least? So we can jerk these windows loose and jump out? That's your problem, was the deputy warden's reply. You have to get out the best way you can. End of communication. Fortunately, some of the blacks next door in cell house 6 were interested in using the band room as a command post and decided to help us. They broke the emergency glass that encased a fire hose in the hallway, took the hose and hooked it up to a faucet in the janitorial closet between the two units and drenched the stairway. When the flames were subdued, rioters wearing masks made their way upstairs through the smoke to see what they could do for us. They offered the mask to anyone who wanted to go down to the gymnasium, but there were no takers. By this time, the open windows and the dousing of the fire had cleared the air somewhat, and we decided again not to leave. Aside from our wariness about the sanity of the rioters, there were a few in the old men's dorm who were guilty of sex crimes and feared they might be harmed if recognized by some drugged raving con. The blacks set up their command post in the band room, with its full view on the front of the prison and the activities of the police. They had several two-way radios, and to distract ourselves from the smoke and heat, we paid attention to the transmissions between the riot negotiators and the man outside. From these, we learned that the rioters had taken a blowtorch to the grill that blocked the protection unit in empty cell block 5 from the main corridor. Hey, ese, the Chicano voice said to someone calling himself Chopper 1. We're just now getting started to cut the grill. When we get through, we're gonna burn in the 5 and see if there are any more torches in there or whatever else we can use when we get into protection. We're going down after the snitches. Gonna kill us. Some of those motherfuckers, man. That dude has some fucked up broken English. Okay, Chopper 1 answered. Get it open. Let me know. I want to get that snitching bastard that sent me in the lockup for 6 months. Send him home to his mama. For the next hour and a half, we heard them talking back and forth about their progress. "Well, how you doing?" Chopper 1 called to ask at one point. "How long is it going to take you guys to get through those bars?" "Well, we're still at it. I think we're running low on oxygen. Someone will have to go down and get us another bottle." Deputy Warden Montoya and his crew outside were also picking up these transmissions and knew that a massacre of snitches was imminent. They knew too that it was going to take the rioters some time to cut through the two sets of bars. Time enough for police to come in by the Sallyport area in the rear of the prison, enter cell block 4 by a back entrance to which they were supposed to have keys in the front guard tower, and lead the 96 men in the snitch unit out to safety. Even if they didn't have the keys to the back door, there was a garage in the Sallyport where other cutting torches were kept. They could have attempted what the rioters were doing and cut the doors open, but they didn't. Later, prison administrators would explain to investigators that the set of keys in the tower was incomplete. There were keys to the back door of the cell block, but none to the grill, allowing entrance into the cell area. Whether it was a matter of missing keys or missing motivation is a question that will be debated for years. But privately and in courts, hearing the claims of families whose sons, brothers, and husbands were killed due in part to the negligence of prison authorities. The deputy warden and superintendent of correctional security had arrived at the main gatehouse in front of the prison shortly after the riot began. Easy to do because they both lived on the penitentiary grounds. Warden Jeffrey Griffin also lived on the grounds and joined them a few minutes later. As one of his first tactics, the security chief armed the tower officers with riot guns and instructed them to fire on anyone attempting to escape. This proved an unnecessary move. The inmates made it clear in their first radio communication with these officials that they weren't going to try to escape. They were holding out for a meeting with the news media and the governor, Bruce King. But the rioters warned that if the National Guard or state police tried to rush the institution, they would kill their hostages. They put the dog-leashed and beaten Captain Roybal on the radio to confirm their intentions. The three administrators talked it over and agreed to negotiate the release of the hostages rather than attempt to retake the penitentiary. By common consent, Montoya was designated negotiator. He'd recently returned from San Francisco, where he'd taken a timely course in crisis intervention in hostage situations. His strategy was to keep the rioters from talking to the governor and the warden. Setting up first in his car and then in the gatehouse, Montoya used a handset radio to carry on his talks with the inmate negotiators. He conducted himself in the manner learned as hostage school, alternating between soothing and harsh tones. Most of his dialogues were with Chopper 1, but the person behind that name changed several times throughout the negotiations. So many times, inmates had two-way radios that it was hard to decipher what was being said or who was really in the position to speak for the rioters. Montoya's radio was also picking up communications from sheriff's officers who had arrived on the scene, so that many inmate transmissions were lost in the confusions. He finally demanded that the sheriff stop using the radios, and the babble calmed enough for him to hear Chopper 1's demands. It became clear that regardless of the change in person behind the name, Chopper 1 was the main negotiation station. Most inmate demands were made during these hours remained consistent throughout the uprising. The prison was not to be rushed or the hostages would be killed. They wanted to talk with the governor, the warden, Deputy Security of Corrections Felix Rodriguez, and the news media. They wanted a public forum to air their complaints about poor food, overcrowding, mismanagement at the penitentiary, and inadequate recreation. And they asked for the resignation of the administrators they most despised: Deputy Warden Montoya himself, Associate Warden Aladado Martinez, the Superintendent of Correctional Security, Manuel Coriones, and Lieutenant Benito Gonzalez, known better by inmates as Green Eyes. It wasn't until Felix Rodriguez arrived that action on the convicts' behalf began. A hose was dragged to the main entrance of the prison to try and combat the fires, though it did little good. Wounded prisoners were allowed to be brought out for treatment. This netted a reward for the administration. The helpful inmates who'd hidden Officer Herman Gallegos in the dormitory at the start of the riot smuggled him past rioters and through the main entrance by dressing him in a prison uniform and arming him with a pipe. Rodriguez was fair but firm. He demanded to know how many hostages were being held and their names. Riot negotiators were also firm. They fired back over the radio. If you don't start negotiating pretty soon, these guards are going to get wasted. Captain Roybal will be the first one to pop out of the door dead. Rodriguez countered that if there were no assurances the hostages were still alive, he would order the SWAT team inside the penitentiary. And if that happens, he said, it's going to be worse than Attica. Kill one of my officers and we'll come in and kill every one of you. By then, the entire penitentiary had been surrounded by state police, sheriff's officers, and the Santa Fe SWAT team. The governor had been notified of the riot, and the National Guard was on its way. Meanwhile, everyone's radio sets were buzzing with transmissions about the progress of the torching through the grill to cell block 4 and threats against the snitches' lives. All them guys in cell block 4 that you've been using, someone broadcast directly to Deputy Warden Montoya. Well, I've got some of them in the sack, just in case you don't cooperate. Eyewitnesses that you call the snitches, they're all gonna get shanked. That the killing of the inmates in cell block 4 would occur, these administrators had no doubt. They knew the hardcore men in cell block 3 had been released. They'd seen them moving up and down the hallways through the windows, but Montoya's newly learned hostage strategy held. No police or staff members were to go near the prison. The major objective was to keep the hostages from being killed. If 96 convicts faced being burned to death because of that strategy, it clearly was of no consequence and an extension of the public's attitude toward a person convicted of committing a crime. 7 a.m. daybreak, Groundhog Day. Through the billowing smoke that shaded the sunrise, the guards staffing the South Tower spotted an inmate crawling out of a window in Unit E, waving a white towel. The men in E1, the semi-protection unit, had managed to forge an opening in a window with the pipe wrench Joe Madrid died providing them. When the sirens screaming through the front gates of the penitentiary stopped, the tower guard could hear the men shouting, "We want to surrender, we want to surrender." The officer cocked his gun and aimed it at the convict before he leaned out of the tower window and yelled back, "Okay, come out with your hands on top of your head and lay down on your stomach." The inmate did as he was told. The guard used his bullhorn to address the men still inside the dormitory. "Come out one at a time with your hands on your head and get down on your stomachs." The window opening was big enough for only one man at a time anyway. In 20 minutes, though, all 87 residents of the semi-protection unit had crawled through it and were laying face down on the cold ground outside. They were the first of hundreds of convicts who would run from the insanity inside the prison during the next 30 hours. The inmates in the full protection unit, cell block 4, the snitch cage, didn't have such luck. As the men in E1 found freedom, the rioters wielding the cutting torch succeeded in melding through the last hinge of the protection unit grill. 30 minutes before, they'd gotten into cell block 5, which was undergoing renovation, and found 2 more acetane torches. They'd been left by the construction crew, even though 2 weeks after the December escape of 11 inmates, a memo had been sent to the superintendent of security by 2 guards suggesting that these tools be removed from the institution each day. Later, the security chief would say he never saw that memo. These torches now became instruments of torture. Wearing bandanas pulled up over their faces and ski hats pulled over their hair, the rioters ran through the open grill up and down the catwalks of each tier yelling, "We're coming after you bastards. We're gonna kill you sorry ass motherfuckers." They were specific about who they wanted, however. They went straight for the guard station where the picture roster of everyone in the cell block was kept. Once they found the cell numbers of the men they were targeting, they divided into groups, roaming the 3 tiers until they found them. Getting their mask out of the cell wasn't so easy. When they realized the door to the cell block was being torched, those in the unit who thought there was a good chance they'd be on the most wanted list had begun taking security measures. They made smoke bombs of their mattresses, tearing them open, stuffing them with toilet paper, and then setting them on fire, hoping that when the rioters broke into the catwalk, it would be so thick with smoke they'd be forced out or at least slowed down until help could be gotten. The rioters weren't slowed, and help never came. The men in protection prepared for the eventuality too. Lifting their heads on end, they had jammed the legs into the door rail to keep it from being cranked open and tied bed sheets around the door and bars of the cell to further ensure their safety. Then they armed themselves with chair and table legs and waited for the onslaught. While bands of masked inmates went looking through the objects of their wrath, taking blowtorches to cut through the barricaded doors, others freed their friends. The black contingent was particularly anxious to get the black Muslim minister out before the bloodshed began. Because so many inmates had jammed their doors, the lever on the main control board that released the locking device to his cell was stuck.